about this in the first chapter of my book. When you're acting as a broker, I call you a deal maker. And as a deal maker, what your responsibility is matching. You know, if you're working with the user's looking for a property. If you're working with a property owner, maybe they're looking for a tenant, or maybe they're looking for a loan. And then if you're working with investors, you've got to find loans, you've got to find properties. And what you do as a real estate broker with all your contracts that you signed, I call that deal making. The important part of it, in my mind, is when the deal is done and you've fulfilled your responsibilities, it's over. And during that time, rarely do you take any money from the investors. And that's totally different than being a group sponsor, a syndicator, whatever you want to call it. I'll probably use the word sponsor more often. A group sponsor gets the money from investors. That money runs through the group sponsor into the property. At some point in time, from operations or capital transactions, the money comes out of the property back through the sponsor's control to the investors. So all the while you're being a group sponsor, you are in charge of your investors' money, and that raises the whole issue of fraud and misrepresentation and securities laws, as we're going to find out. So it is a little different, and on some other time I could talk about, are there conflicts of doing both of these actions at the same time? And yes, there are, and you just have to deal with a lot of disclosure, but enough of that one. Here's why this conversation is important. My legal advice to you, and I didn't give you a disclaimer, but my disclaimer is I'm not giving you legal advice, but my legal advice to you is that if you're going to go out and buy a property yourself, buy it in the form of an investment of an LLC, and I'm going to just call it, for the purpose of my slide, investment LLC. Buy the property, put it in an LLC, and that gives you total liability protection from your other assets. If something goes wrong in that property, the lawsuit is directed toward the ownership of that property, which is the investment LLC, and that's the only asset that's in there. So that's smart. That's good advice for you. You would be the member. You purchase interest in the LLC. The LLC owns the property. The LLC gets underwritten. The property gets underwritten. The loan is in the name of the LLC, but you're the member. And for right now, I'm going to call that a member-managed LLC. And that's straightforward, and that's what you should do. Now, what I think the second part is if there's more than one investor, you automatically have a syndication. Now, syndication, that's a vocabulary term. A lot of people call me and say, hey, Gene, I want to put together 10 investors to buy a property, but I don't want it to be a syndication. Bad question. It is a syndication because two or more people combining to do any business activity is a syndication. The real question is, Gene, I don't want it to be a security. That's the question. And, you know, all the commercial brokers that are listening to this show realize that when they're dealing with a property, more than likely the property has as an owner an investment LLC. Very seldom is a property owned by a person. It's an LLC, it's a corporation, it's a limited partnership. So you're in the world of investment LLCs and securities offerings all the time, but you don't often know it. Even if you're not going to be a syndicator, you know, the rest of this presentation will give you some information that would help you do your brokerage business. The difference between this slide and the previous slide is this box here, the manager LLC. When you have enough members, you need someone to be in charge. And so we form a manager LLC. And in that manager LLC, it's very important that it's an LLC because that gives everyone in there limited liability. None of their other assets are at risk. The manager LLC manages investment LLC. So one of the things from a broker standpoint I'd be interested in, and I knew it affected me when I started in the business and I started learning about this, when you're sitting at the kitchen table with a couple and you're going to sign a listing agreement, you don't have to go very far to figure out if that's the couple that owns the house and do they have authority to sign the listing agreement so that you get paid if you perform. But in a commercial property, you're sitting in an office and there's someone who's going to sign a listing agreement for an office building or a shopping center or an apartment building. How do you know that that person has the authority to bind that entity to pay you a commission to deliver the property if in fact you find a tenant or a buyer? You wouldn't know unless you looked at the agreement. So one of the pieces of advice I'd have to brokers out there is to ask for a copy of the manager LLC and then review it to see that the person who's sitting across from you who's going to sign the documents is named in that agreement as the person who has the authority. Okay, so I think that's very important from a broker standpoint. But from a syndication standpoint, here's why this happens. James and I know a lot of syndicators, and we all know how they started. They found a piece of property that they wanted to buy, but they didn't have enough money to buy it themselves. Or if they did, they didn't want to put all their money in one property. So what they decided to do is to form a group to buy the property, to provide an opportunity for members of the group to come in and invest in this property that they wouldn't be able to do on their own. You know, not everyone has the money, the time, the knowledge, or really the interest to buy and own their own piece of real estate. But through the syndication process, everyone can invest in real estate. And I'm going to tell you how big this business is. What I'm talking about here that I'm going to get to is called private placements, offerings of securities that are not formally approved by the SEC and are not found on Wall Street. These are called private placements. This business, the last 12 months, according to the SEC, was $2.9 trillion of syndication. The biggest chunk is real estate. It's not the majority, but it's a big chunk. High tech is another huge chunk, especially out here on the West Coast and in California and actually Texas now. So $2.9 trillion. That's more money in the 12 months that the SEC did the study than Wall Street raised for new offerings during the same period of time. This is where the money is raised for small businesses. You might remember 10, 12 years ago, something came out called the Jobs Act, jumpstart our businesses. And the whole issue of the Jobs Act was to promote capital formation for small businesses, which they define as under 500 employees, because this is where all those business owners get their money. So this picture is good because it says, you know, the members purchase interest in investment LLC. They do it because there's a projection, a promise, an anticipation, no guarantee of a profit, but it's going to happen through the results of the manager LLC. An investment of money in a common enterprise with an anticipation of profit through the results of the manager. Okay, that's what makes it a security. The previous picture, where it was just a member managed LLC, there was no manager box. There was no one managing the money of the investors. Here, Someone has the money. Someone is managing the money of the investors. And the government decided way back in the 1930s that we needed some legislation to protect the investors against bad investments and unscrupulous people who raised money from them. So that's why the securities laws came along. And in order to do a good job for your clients and for you, when you become a syndicator yourself, getting these people around you to go out and buy a property. And, as James said, it just doesn't have to be real estate. Last year, we syndicated a hockey team. We syndicated a fiber optics company, any type of business that needs capital after you to go to mom and dad and go through your bank account and get whatever you can from the bank, you're going to be short capital. So you need to go to other investors to get the money. So you need to know all these things. And all these items here are chapters in my book, and I'm going to make it possible for you to get a free copy of that book. Today, we're primarily talking about securities laws. So the securities laws were written in the 30s with two purposes. One, to protect investors from fraudulent investments. Prior to the securities laws, there was no requirement of written documents or anything like that. So the government came along and said, to protect the investors, we need to provide full disclosure. And what that turns out to be in today's world is writing a private placement memorandum, writing an operating agreement, a subscription agreement, and a couple of filings of securities notices. Those are the things that someone like me does for a client when they want to put together a syndication. The other part of the rule was that there needed to be some protection for the investors from the people who sell fraudulent investments. And that came up with a whole licensing, the development of the SEC, the ability for the SEC to require people who sell securities to have licenses. Now, we don't have to worry about that very much. The analogy here is in real estate, for sale by owner, I can sell my own real estate, but I can't sell yours unless I have a license. In the securities world, if I'm a member of the manager and I'm issuing securities in investment LLC, I can operate without a license under what's called the issuer exemption, but it's still the for sale by owner exemption. If I'm bringing out my own offering to the public, I don't need any securities license, which is good. So you don't really have to worry about that. What you have to worry about is the disclosure issue with fraudulent investments. Now, so what is the security? We talked about it. It's when members invest their money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profit, and the results are going to be conducted by the manager. So in our member managed entity, which we started out, we're not in the securities world because the one or two people who own the LLC make all the decisions themselves. No one is in charge of anyone else's money. Fine. But you get over here where there's the manager, now someone is in charge of the money. And if you're in the securities world, the one thing you need to do is you need to be able to offer securities that are exempt from the SEC. Now, in my introduction, James talked about Regulation A, and there's also regulation crowdfunding. All these things over here have to do with some involvement, some direct involvement in the approval of the offering from the SEC. We don't need to do that. We're going to stay over here for the purposes of this conversation. We're going to stay over here in offerings that are totally exempt from SEC registration, and they are offered under a law that came out in 1981 called Regulation D. Now, what control does the SEC have over these offerings? Very little. Within 15 days of raising the money, the attorney sends a form called a Form D as in dog to the SEC, which is an information gathering form, not control over the offering. They don't look at it. They don't care. They just want all the information. And then that form gets sent to the states where the sponsor is finding investors. If we find an investor in California, we're going to send the state notice to California. If we find someone in Oklahoma, no matter how many investors there are in Oklahoma, we just send them a notice. The states require being put on notice when you go into a state and raise money from their citizens. The state can't do anything about it, because not only is the offering exempt from SEC registration, but it's preempted from state control. However, if things go wrong, the investor typically calls the state first, and the state needs to know how to get a hold of the person who is responsible for the offering. That's why they want the Form D. So this is where you're going to do your work. And this is where almost everyone who comes to you with a property and you're going to do a lease, or you're going to list it, or you're going to finance it, this is how they've conducted their securities offering under Regulation D, with exactly this picture I told you: investment LLC and the manager. And the manager makes all the decisions. The manager gets underwritten for the loan, okay? The manager box is the most important box if you're trying to deal with these people and have them say, Gene, if you do this, I'll do that. How do you know they have the authority? Well, you have to look at what the manager box says. So one of the things that Regulation D did, 1981, when I was syndicating, it defined what an accredited investor is, and everyone has heard that term. In 1981, they set the rule that rich and smart people did not need the protection of the SEC. So what was in 1981 rich and smart? A net worth of an investor of $1 million and or $200,000 annual income if you file an individual tax return, or $300,000 if you're married and filing jointly, or certain entities, if they had $5 million in net worth, the entity itself was accredited and we're not worried about who the individual owners, like my law firm's 401k. If we had $5 million, don't you wish, in our 401k, it could invest as an accredited investor, regardless of the people who work in my company and whether they are individually accredited or not. So that's been the rule for a long time. One change came along when Dodd-Frank came out after the 2008 crash, is they decided that people were qualifying themselves as accredited investors using the equity in their personal residence. And Congress felt that was too risky. I mean, you're out here in Southern California or other places in the country where, 50 years ago, someone bought a house for $100,000 and now it's worth $2 million, and they're living on Social Security and taking oxygen. They're not accredited. They shouldn't be accredited. They shouldn't be putting their principal residence at risk. So they came along with these 3 bullet points, and it really just takes the principal residence out of it. And that cut about 1/3 of the households out of the definition of accredited investor. And just as a little aside, when 81 came and this definition came through, 3% of the households were considered accredited. Today, the study is it's about 18% of the households are accredited, even after Dodd-Frank. And there is an argument that that's too many. That's too many households that don't get the protection of the SEC in these private placements. And there's a million choices. One of the things they've been discussing is, why don't we take the numbers that you see on this page and just increase them by what the CPI has increased over time? And it's about 3 to 1. So if they made that change, and there's nothing proposed, if they've just talked about it, it would be $3 million of net worth, 600 as an individual, and 900 marrying filing jointly. Well, I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's what they talk about. The other thing that I think could happen, and I'm paying attention to this, is just with the house, just like with the house, does it make sense for people to put their equity in their primary residence at risk when they go into these deals? Well, is it reasonable for them to put their retirement savings at risk when they go into a syndication? So there is some thought about taking the money that you have in your IRA and your 401k out of the calculation of your $1 million of net worth, so you're not putting that money at risk. That seems like a reasonable approach and not one that I'm terribly against. It makes some sense. But once again, nothing is written. There hasn't been any proposal. There's just discussion about that. So this is what accredited investors are. And why is that important? Because when you do a Reg D offering, you're going to do the syndication yourself. This applies to you who are going to be syndicators. There are two ways to work under Reg D. When Reg D came out in 1981, there was one way, and it was everything that's in this box. I could raise as much money as I wanted. I could have as many accredited investors as I could find. Because I knew the investors, they could just check a box and tell me that they were $1 million or 200,000. And in addition, to promote capital, in 1981, they said, well, why don't we let 35 sophisticated investors? Now, that's a topic for another time, but I've got a great YouTube channel. And in my YouTube channel, I have a presentation called 3 Words. And one of the words is sophisticated. And what the SEC says a sophisticated investor is someone who, alone with their own personal experiences and business acumen, or with a professional advisor, can understand the deal and determine the risk-reward relationship for themselves. Okay, not just someone you have in your database. You have their email address. So what? You don't know anything about that person. But you can have 35 sophisticated investors, which is how most of us get started. You know, when you go out to raise the money on your first deal, you're going to raise money from people you know. Some people call it family and friends. Okay, that's okay. But it's people that you know. And many of them will not be accredited. So that's where you need to start raising your money. Reg D requires a disclosure document. The whole purpose of the securities law is to prevent fraudulent investment. So we need to tell people everything about the investment. So we do that in a document that's called the Private Placement Memorandum. My slide says recommended or required. It's required if you have one sophisticated investor in your deal. It's recommended if all of your investors are accredited and you believe it's the best way to tell everyone the same information at the same time and have proof that you did the disclosure. It really is an insurance policy for you. Our practice does not do any offerings unless there's a private placement memorandum drafted. In the original rule under 506, there was no advertising and no solicitation. So when I was raising money, I could raise money from as many accredited investors as I wanted, but I didn't know how to get a hold of them because I couldn't advertise. And a lot of people would have loved to invest in my self-storage deals, but they didn't know how to find me because there was no place that I was advertising. So this was all just an effort to keep the risk down by making sure that the people who invested knew the sponsor and vice versa. No advertising and solicitation, and it exempted or preempted these offerings from state regulation. Now, when it says no advertising and solicitation, we can have a long discussion about that, but simply it means that on the day you start your offering, your database has X number of investors in it. You have a pre-existing relation with those investors. Those investors can invest with you. But if you're going out and trying to find new people, you're advertising and soliciting, however you do it. The addition of new people into your investment pool after the day you start your offering is going to cause you trouble, and it's going to be a violation. Now, I didn't say it because I don't want to scare anyone, but the securities laws are, it's a criminal statute. It can be civil, but it also can raise to a criminal statute. And we've all seen on the news people who have gone to jail for doing things wrong in the securities world. So that's what it was, 1981 to 2012, when the Jobs Act came out. What the Jobs Act said, there's all sorts of accredited investors who would like to invest with Gene. And there's all sorts of accredited investors that if Gene could get a hold of them, he could tell them about his offering. So let's open up, for the purposes of promoting capital formation, jumpstart our businesses. Let's open up marketing to accredited investors. Let's just let Gene advertise and solicit. Who cares when he got to meet these people? Maybe someone will invest with him who's never even met him. Fine. If they're accredited, they're rich and smart, they can take the risk themselves. So 506C came along and said you can still raise all the money you want. You can have unlimited accredited investors. I would have to do a third-party verification for people I didn't know to make sure that they are accredited, but I can't have any sophisticated investors because I'm going to be getting people who don't know me and I don't know them. And a PPM is recommended. It's certainly recommended in our firm. Now, let me go back to 2.9 trillion. 2.9 trillion in private placements, things that are not regulated by the SEC. Of that amount, 96% of the 2.9 trillion is raised in Regulation D. And of the 96%, 90% today is raised in 506B. This is where you're going to find your investors. To find someone to send you a $50,000 check when they don't know you would basically depend upon a great track record. But when you're just starting out, you don't have a great track record. No one is going to respond to your advertising and send you money. You're going to have to build your business like everyone else does from people that you know. So one of the things you always have to do is be building your database with potential investors. So from the standpoint of you going out and doing deals to keep it legal, you need to educate yourself about what is a security, and it's typically whenever there's a manager. You need to educate yourself about Regulation D, the two parts of Regulation D. What are you going to do? And you need to absolutely get professional help. Get a securities attorney to draft your documents. Now, this is going to be recorded, and this will be somewhere in the world that James has put together. But anyhow, my book, the 4th edition, is available to you by clicking on the QR code or just going to my website. And I'll give you my website address in just a minute, and you can get a free PDF of the book. If you want a hard copy of the book, if you pay me, I think $9 for shipping, we'll send you a hard copy of the book. You can buy the book on Amazon if you want, but this is the cheapest and easiest way to get the book. And once again, it covers all the things that you need to know in order to keep you out of trouble, keep you out of jail if you want, to do an investment syndication according to the rules. Now, my website is tnllp.com. On the website, you'll also find a place where you can purchase the 3-hour virtual course that we have that goes into this in more detail. Jonathan Ney, my partner, and I do a lot of virtual education for the CCIM Institute. 3 times a year, we do a 3-hour course for CCIMs and candidates. But we went ahead and recorded a similar presentation that's on the website that you can purchase. I think it's $249, but you can purchase. It comes with a book, and you can have it yourself, and you can study it over and over. Another thing you can do is you can always go to the website and sign up for a free consultation, either with Jonathan or myself. Half-hour free consultation. Sign up on the website, and there's my direct line. For all the years I've been in business, James, you know this, I answer my own phone. So if you call me to work with me, you'll work with me. All right. We have some time left. I'm open for questions.
First, Gene, I just want to say thank you. And you know what? With technology, I remember how much the course cost. So this is a bargain, and the books and everything else. And really, this is a great opportunity for people here wanting to syndicate. And yeah, like you said, you can syndicate businesses, residential portfolios, right? There's so many things you can do, but you just got to get the education and the counsel and the experts to kind of help you with the first couple deals until you kind of build your track record. So I want to give anyone a chance to speak with Gene. And this is a tremendous and huge opportunity for people to learn from somebody that has consulted and done a tremendous amount of deals. So just raise your hand or just ask the question.
I just have a comment. Gene, my dearest friend and mentor, I texted him while I was listening to what you're sharing with us, and he lives out in Dana Point. He says, "Oh, I've been to 2 of his 2-day seminars." He said, "You're the best." So that was awesome. His name is Bill Williams, and
absolutely,
anyway,
sure. Well, thank you. Yes, when live courses were the thing, we used to do them. With the 3-day course that we offered at the Institute was $1,995. Mm-hmm. So certainly prices have come down, and even the virtual courses are cheaper than they used to be. So we'd be happy to have you get one of those. Anyone else? Do I have to go in the chat and see if this is something for me?
I'll ask some questions while they do it. So how does this apply, Gene, to, let's say, since I see Flo here, international syndication? Is it just in the US, or let's say in Canada, people want to invest into the US for deals?
All right. The securities laws only involve how to raise money from people and protect the people and do it legally. It has nothing to do with the asset. Okay, nothing to do with the asset. So we do have clients who raise money from US people and then go somewhere else in the world to place the money and do whatever it is with it, buy real estate or whatever. We have people who raise money from US citizens to buy real estate here. And if you do it right, you can take foreign investors in. The only thing that my concern is the rules about the Patriot Act and withholding and is it drug money? Is it terrorist money? Make it so that my clients will only take money from a foreigner if the foreigner has come to the United States, formed an LLC or a corporation, and that'll depend upon what country they're coming from, and get a US tax ID number and fund that entity through a major bank, Citibank, US Bank, because then the major bank has to go through all the tests and everything to see if it's bad money and bad people. And my clients wouldn't have the capability of doing that. But once the money's in a US bank and there's a tax ID number, yes, go right ahead. You can take those investors. We do have a special subscription agreement that they sign. And all these rules we've just talked about don't apply. There's no definition of a foreign accredited investor. these are rules that just cover US citizens, so we can just take them. There's a different form we form. It's called a Form S, as in Sam, that just tells the SEC we've raised money from foreign investors, and so that they're on record in case someone calls. How did they get a hold of Gene Trowbridge? Okay, that's it. So yes, you can do that. The world is wide open.
Thank you, Gene. And that's the interesting thing. As the world is getting smaller, since when we start talking about the events and everything else, it takes time to get out there, network. And now with social media technology, oh boy, it is a click. But can you go into a little of marketing? Because I know everyone doesn't always have the sprayer or circle. It's friends and family, people here, and they want to somehow market it, right? To use it as a net to capture leads. What can you and can't you do if you're trying to attract or promote to get new clients?
So while you don't have an offering, okay, you can attract people to your database by doing, and I have another video on this called Sell the Sizzle. And the sizzle is, can you attract people to you who understand the sizzle of being in the real estate industry? I mean, maybe you're not in the real estate industry and you're selling medical equipment. I don't know, but whatever industry you're in, let's leave it for real estate. Sell the sizzle of the real estate industry. Sell the sizzle of the part of the real estate industry in which you've become an expert, and you have a team that you've assembled that can capitalize on the opportunities in the part of the real estate industry, and then sell the sizzle of your background, your team. Those are three parts of selling the sizzle. You can do that when you don't have an offering. Okay, because the rule is no offer or sale can be made through the use of advertising or solicitation on a current or contemplated offering. So if you just simply don't have an offering and you don't have anything in escrow and whatever, you can build your database using those three things: the sizzle of real estate, the sizzle of your part of the real estate industry, and the sizzle of you and how you can capture these opportunities. There's a fourth part. Whereas the fourth part of sell the sizzle, and it's the sizzle of your offering. Okay. Well, if you're building your database with people who like real estate, like take me, for example, they like real estate, they like what the benefits of building self-storage is, creating net worth. They're not concerned about checks to buy groceries because there aren't going to be any checks because we're building a property, and they want to work with someone that has had a track record like me. Okay, if I know about those people and I get them in the database, when I do have an offering, I've got a good set of clients. Now I go to the clients with the offering. When I first started out, like everyone else, all I wanted was the PPM, and now I'm going to go out and talk to people. Well, half of the people I talked to didn't want real estate, didn't want self-storage, and didn't know who I was. So we had to build it from the top down. And by the time we put a qualified person in our database, we just knew that they wanted to hear from us when we had our next offering. So once again, the YouTube channel, which is Trowbridge Nay. I guess I didn't put it on there. It's Trowbridge Nay or Trowbridge. You'll find it. Has a video on Sell the Sizzle.
You know, and you brought something really important. PPMs. Everyone thinks I'm just going to go put some money, get a PPM, do all this stuff. And that's expensive. So how would people how they could start with the LLC starts very, very simple to obviously with the PPM, a little more complex. Obviously, you have track record unless you have already a team. But how is the easiest way, Gene, that you've seen everyone and advised and helped out to start the syndication, right? To see a property and get started?
Well, I do a lot of business, James, with rookies. I've built my career and my business educating, education-based marketing to rookies. And then a rookie comes to me and says, okay, I'm going to do my first deal. Typically, they come to me when they have a letter of intent signed on the property and they're in the negotiation stage and it's positive to get a purchase and sale agreement. Sometimes they wait until they get a purchase and sale agreement and then they come to me. And there's really no simple way to do it. I do an interview called a deal structure interview. I get the information I need to draft the PPM. I send them the draft of the PPM to make sure I have the story right. That's what the PPM is. That's my disclosure story. If I have it right, then I can do the operating agreement and the subscription agreement. 3 weeks, maybe 4 on your first deal. If you're a person who reads every word and wants a lot of discussion with me, 3 to 4 weeks to get it all set to go. You should have at least another 3 or 4 weeks to collect the money. While I'm doing all my work and while you're doing all your due diligence on the property, you're telling the people that are in your database, hey, I think I found something. As soon as I get all my work done, I'm going to come to you for a check. It's exactly what I said it would be. And you get about 50% of your people who will pop on the first deal that you offer them. That's good. And I would say that no matter who you use, this is kind of an interesting fraternity of attorneys who do private placements. No matter who you use, you should be prepared to pay $10,000 to $15,000 on your first offering. And then when you raise your money, you get that money paid back to you. The investors actually do pay for it, but to start with it, you have to front end the money to the attorney. So that's how you get started. And I think if you're going to do a syndication and it's your first one, you need at least a 60-day escrow, 60 days from when you contact your securities attorney, maybe with the ability to extend for another 30, or if you can get 90, it would be great, because your due diligence and my paperwork is going to eat up the first 30 days. Now you have 30 days to get to closing, which means you have to find the people. Hopefully they're not on vacation. Hopefully the money's not in their IRA account, and you need to collect that money so you can close on your deal.
You know, Gene, I just love this, that the wealth of knowledge, and bring it back, because yes, you got to structure the timeline. So I would advise people to speak with you first. If you even think about it, kind of line up your ducks. While we all know this opportunity from this market cycle is going to happen, we've seen office buildings, we've seen different projects just with the high interest rates. So Gene, I love what you said about structuring the deal, because you and I have seen so many people scramble last minute or make these desperate calls, and we always know when they're desperate for that bridge capital or mezz or something. Can you go into a little bit about, you know, what you've seen about other capital raisers trying to help you do the bridge? Because there's always the, I buy the property up front, I refi and get the money out, or I tie up the project, and then I'm going to raise all the money, and hopefully the deal works out within my timeline. So can you kind of show up, I have the money, do it, and then pull the money out to, oh boy, I got to work within the timelines to find the investors?
Well, this is a very important legal issue that you bring up, but in my full course, when I start talking about the mistakes that syndicators make, the number one mistake I put on the list is not having enough time, not structuring your deal so that you have enough time to get the paperwork, understand the paperwork, get with the investors, and collect the money. Number one. Now, your issue really goes to using other people to raise money for you. Remember what I said about for sale by owner? I can sell my own house, but I can't sell yours. The issue or exemption is the same thing. Everyone in the manager entity can sell the securities that you're offering. But if you're not in the manager entity, you can't, because you don't have the issue or exemption. So the only people who can sell your securities legally, if they're not in the manager group, would be a licensed registered agent, a securities broker. So if someone comes to you and says, I can raise $1 million for you, and if I do, will you pay me $25,000? the first question is, do you have a securities license? And generally the answer is no. They just think they're a fundraiser. And so then you have to get into a discussion. Is there a way that they can enter the manager agreement, the manager entity, and have an important position that doesn't involve raising money? And the one we usually suggest, since they're going to be raising a lot of money and their clients are going to be in, is investor relations. Can you put this person in charge over investor relations? Sometimes the person who can raise the money is a real estate professional, and you can have them involved in due diligence and things like that. But if they're in only to raise money, they need to have a license. And you can't pay them based on how much they raise. The technical language, there's no transaction-based compensation. Transaction-based compensation defined as commission. You can't pay them a commission for bringing in their $1 million. You could give them 15% of the deal. What have you carved out for yourself as the sponsor? And if James wants to bring in $1 million and wants to be involved in due diligence with me or some other important issue, I could set aside 15% of whatever I get, or 20%, it's negotiable, to pay him as we go along. But if he raises twice as much as he said he would, or nothing, he's going to get 15%. If there's any way on audit that can be tied down to anything that looks like a commission, James is going to be charged with acting as an unregistered broker-dealer. That is a pretty serious crime. And one of the things that we know for sure is that an unregistered broker-dealer can be held responsible for rescission. So James has brought in $1 million of his investors. The deal goes bad. The investors find out that he acted improperly as an unregistered broker-dealer. They can ask James for the $1 million back. James doesn't have the $1 million. He only got paid 25 to start with. James is in trouble. And most of these people who run around trying to raise money for you, first of all, they're violating the law. And secondly, they don't have any idea about their risk. So you owe it to them to warn them about the risk, and you owe it to them not to take them in unless it's done right. And you owe it to yourself too, of course.
Dean, thank you so much for sharing this. And there's a wealth of knowledge. So I do recommend and tell everyone to take a look at the YouTube channel, reach out to Gene. I can vouch that he does pick up the phone, or at least if you text him or reach out, he's a wealth of knowledge and really connection. So you get a lot more than just the knowledge of how to do the deals, but the wealth of connections, relationships, because obviously Gene does know many of the players, as Eric mentioned. A lot of people you trade, Eric, me, myself, with myself, you've given me a wealth of knowledge over the years and I've put it into play, but it's always updating, right? As we always see with the Jobs Act, with this, with crowdfunding, there's just so many, and we don't even want to open up now, Gene, tokenization, right? All these new things because of technology, blockchain that's popping up. And I'm sure that's a whole different topic, but any final words for everyone here that you would recommend before we close out for today?
Yes, in the $2.9 trillion, we zeroed down to the huge amount of that money is raised in 506B. Huge amount of money. The median offer size in the 506B is $2.5 million. So of all of that money that's raised, half of the deals raise less than $2.5 million. So this is something you can do. Depending upon where you are in the country, $2.5 million of equity can buy a substantial piece of real estate. And depending upon where you are, 1 million can buy a substantial piece of real estate. So 3 truths that I have: if you start a deal, you've got to know that you can close it. So don't bite off too much to start with. Your first deal, you have to raise all the money for, no one else is going to do it. And you have to be the one that communicates with the investors. And if you start a deal, you've got to get that deal done. You've got to know somehow that if your money raising doesn't go as fast as you think, there's a way that you can close the deal. Because in your first deal, your best friends and family are going to put the money in first. If it doesn't close and you give them the money back, when you bring your second deal out, they're going to be hesitant. They're going to say, well, it didn't work the first time. I'll just wait. You know, James, I'm going to invest with you, but why don't you raise some money from someone else first and then give me a call? That's problematic. So you've got to get your first deal done, because investors should ask you 4 questions. James, in your syndication, if something happens to you, what happens to my money? And James is going to say he has more than one person in the manager group. James, have you done this before? We all started out with the answer, no. You have to get to the fact, sure we have, we've done it. James, are you going to put any of your own money? Are you going to sign the mortgage? Are you going to skin in the game? Yes, you've got to have some answer for that. And then the investor should ask, James, if I invest in your deal and there's a reason I need my money out, do you have provisions for that? And the operating agreements have provisions. So those are 4 questions that don't have anything to do with the asset. Nothing to do with the asset. Continuity, track record, skin in the game, and liquidity for the investor. Those are the 4 things that, once again, I have a great YouTube on that. 4 questions you should ask before you even worry about the deal.
Gene, I love it. I've gotten asked through my course of career those questions, and you always are going to get asked. So you better have those answers to those questions in addition to your track record and everything else. But Gene, thank you so much for being on Top Agent Commercial Wednesdays, a wealth of knowledge, experience. Talk to and reach out to Gene. Definitely download the book, the ebook. Please go watch the YouTube video and join us every Wednesday as we're going to continue this topic, because one of the exciting things is as the market is changing and turning, and let's see if interest rates come down soon, that there's going to be opportunities to put deals together. And please reach out to Gene or some advice or some experts, some lawyers, some people with a track record and knowledge to help you put these deals, stay out of trouble, and really grow your career in real estate. So I just want to, Gene, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending, and looking for anyone to attend and share and reach out to us if there's any topics that you are interested in, so we can actually get some expert speakers like Gene to share their knowledge and really build this connection. So join us again next week, Top Agent Commercial Wednesdays. Everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone.